pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, good morning. I want to say, what an honor to follow two outstanding speakers, and what a delight to be back in one of my favorite countries in the world. It's great to be back in Norway. Like so many Americans, I have some Norwegian heritage, but it's not that much, and it doesn't really matter. I'm not connected to my Norwegian culture, but it means something to me to be back here. So thank you for having me, Nina, and again, thank you all for coming today. So we're going to talk for only half an hour, and then you get to have lunch, okay? So we'll try to make it brief, and I'll try not to speak too quickly. You know, sometimes it happens where, I got to connect myself to this. Hold on a second. Turns out. Okay. So sometimes it happens where at a conference everything sort of comes together, and you feel like there's themes that are connecting. And I have to say that I feel very much like that today between our first two speakers and some of what I want to talk about. The connections are amazing. But I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to give you free access to a recorded lecture that talks about that, and I'll give you those details in a moment. So this is sort of the fundamental question that we're always trying to address. And yeah, I mean, the government says, but they're doing fine on tests, and really in Norway, they really are doing fine on tests. And if the only thing that matters in education is how well children do on tests, then why go through all the bother and hassle of doing Montessori? Now, you know the answer to that question, but there are people who are influential decision makers, and there are parents who always need to keep hearing the answer to this question. Why Montessori? Because how most people view the purpose of education, it is to, do well on the test so that they can gain access to a privileged educational opportunity, which will gain them access to a high-status occupation, right? That's the game. And so, granted, they like the fact that the children are happy, they appear to be thriving, but fundamentally they're worried about this. Well, we know a lot about how valuable that is. The emphasis on how well they do on the test has grown over the last probably 20 years. It's grown all over the world. Now, in the United States, in 2001, George Bush, who, by the way, used to be considered the worst president in modern American history, he passed into law a body of legislation that we know as the No Child Left Behind Act, which basically mandated that every school was going to be doing testing, okay? And that really we began testing the hypothesis that the only thing that matters in education is how well children do on norm reference tests. Now, PISA has simply taken that same ethos, that same philosophy to a global scale. And so, okay, so there's the 2015 PISA scores. You know what PISA is, right? It's really interesting. People in Europe generally have heard of PISA. They know what PISA is. In the United States and in Canada, very few people know what it is. They know about the international testing. They know what that is, but they don't know what PISA is. And PISA is done internationally every 3 years. 2008 was a PISA year. So we'll have the 2008 PISA results, I imagine, just within a few months. So if you can see the purple line, that's the average for the OECD. Okay, so where's Norway? Oh, okay, you guys got nothing to worry about. You're fine. Thanks. Let's go to the bar. Because we don't need to worry, or at least that's what people who think that the way you evaluate a public education. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you, there's the United States. Oh, no. Think for a moment about where your mind instantly goes the moment you see that comparison. A little national pride, a little sense of, all right, But comparison happens instantly. And then, of course, if you can read the little print, you start looking for, who else are we beating? And who's beating us? Well, the answer to that is simple. Asia is beating everybody, okay? For the most part. And I would also add that Finland and Canada beat most people too for reasons that we won't talk about just now. But okay, so this is the problem. The OECD introduced this, and it really was very, it's very neoliberal, very neoliberal thinking. We want to inspire competition amongst education systems around the world. And then we'll just see who rises to the top, and then other countries will copy their methodology, and then education everywhere will get better, as if competition is the way to solve any social problem. Okay, this isn't how things used to be, but this is how thinking went, you could say, near and after the turn of the century, and only now are people beginning to realize that maybe that's kind of a bankrupt approach. But once these things get embedded in national policy, and in the case of national testing, get embedded into law, it only takes like one generation to ruin a public education system by embedding this kind of practice in law. But it has to take multiple generations to use an idiom, to unring that bell. Because once it's embodied, well, what politician is going to go out there and lead the crowd by saying, I'm going to take a hard stand as what? The anti-education candidate, Well, they wouldn't be. They could be like the humane education candidate. But the case is too easy to make, that if you're not interested in school testing, you're not interested in high performance standards, and after all, how else would we know that our schools are doing well or getting better? Do you understand what I mean? So it's a real problem. Once it's in, it's hard to get it out. But there's some interesting things. As the race toward evaluating education by test score becomes is pushed harder, the real bankruptcy of chasing the stupid test score becomes clear. And increasingly, the test score, the diploma, is just about getting your ticket punched on your way to a high-status occupation, okay? And it's not really about the development of the person. It's not really about the development of character. It's not really about understanding your place in history and what we need to do moving forward to save the biosphere. I don't know, details, right? Okay? No, the trouble is it all becomes all about this certification. What did you get during the certification? It doesn't matter that much. I got the certification. I'm a psychologist. I have a license to practice psychology in Minnesota. Fine, licensure. Maybe you have a license to do something in your work. I don't know. Do you need a teaching license? Okay, so you had to pass a certification that demonstrated basic competency. Fine. But it's gotten a little crazy. Now, it turns out that the certification is no longer relevant. It's actually no longer relevant. Not everywhere, but those people who have a stake, a financial stake, in the competency of students now in school and at university, they've done the research. This is Laszlo Bock. He used to be the head of human resources for that company you've heard of called Google. They've done their internal research. College grade point average, right? The marks they got at university is worthless as a predictor for who's going to be a good hire for Google. To be fair, there's a slight correlation, but only if you've just come out of university. Are you all with me on this? They used to ask for all of your test scores, your college entrance exams. Worthless as a predictor. Google used to be famous for doing asking you, the English word is brain teaser. You know what that is? That translate easily? It turns out that brain teasers, or puzzle, how many ping pong balls would fit in a 747? How many manhole covers are there in Oslo? Okay, things you don't know the answer to, but they want to see, are you clever? Can you figure this sort of thing out? Waste of time. Actually, you know who is good at doing brain teasers? Seriously, there is a kind of person who is really good at doing brain teasers. You know who's good at doing brain teasers? People who like doing brain teasers, okay? Because it turns out that doing well on brain teasers is kind of a narrow skill set, if you understand what I mean. And there's accumulating evidence from Google, and we'll look at some other examples in a moment. There's accumulating evidence that among people who can do well at school, and I think we all understand as educators, not everyone is going to be great at school. In fact, there's probably about a third of students in conventional education who are well disposed to do well at school. They have intelligence enough that they can do superior performance, and they have some unique personality. There's a personality trait called conscientiousness, okay? People who are high in intelligence and high in conscientiousness do well at school. That's who does really well at school. About a third of children are basically indifferent to school. Parents go to work, we go to school, whatever. About a third of children are harmed by their experience in conventional education. So we got a system that works well for about a third of children who, by the way, by largely temperament and biological factors, are going to win at conventional school. And some of them who could do well at school care to do well at school. And they will do well at Google, perhaps, okay? But not because they were good at school. Who does well at school? People who can do well at school and people who want to do well at school, okay? And to be fair, we're not against doing well at school, right? But the point is that doing well at school ends up being kind of a narrow skill set, okay? Now, you have to be smart enough to. That is correct, okay? But you have to want to do well at school. And what Google has found is that there's an awful lot of really intelligent people who don't care that much about doing well at school. Instead, they prefer to write code. And those people are excellent hires at Google because it's not the credentials, okay? The credentials are inflated anyway. It's not the credentials, it's the competence, it's the capabilities. That's what they've learned that they have to hire for. In fact, Ernst & Young, they've made the same realization. They want you to have a college degree, but they found that how well you did at university bore no relationship to how good an employee you'd be at Ernst & Young. Because it's not about the credentials, it's about the competencies. IBM commissioned an international survey. They asked 1,700 CEOs in 64 countries and 18 major industries, what do leaders and employees in the global economy need to know how to do? They need to innovate. They need to be able to analyze and collaborate and demonstrate creativity and seek opportunities, leverage complexity. It's a complicated world. If our guys can figure it out faster, we have an edge. They need to be able to communicate effectively within their organizations and with people outside of their organizations. Okay, and you know what the problem is? None of this stuff is on the test. But these are the kinds of things that predict performance in the big wide world, in this sort of post-credential era, which we're into. We're in the post-credential era. People who know their place in history, know the way systems work, and are able to find out how their organization, themselves, can fit within these systems. And it's not on the test, but of course it's all in the brain, isn't it? And this is a problem. We kind of took a shortcut to establishing criteria for advancement in our society, in our world. The shortcut was, let's just measure how much they know. I'm a psychologist. It's easy to measure knowledge, and it's easy to measure intelligence, okay? Those are dead easy. It's a mature science to measure academic knowledge. It's just not a particularly useful thing to measure, because academic knowledge doesn't predict what Google and what Ernst & Young and what all the 1,700 CEOs need. They need somebody who has got the horsepower to solve problems in the world. In fact, really, this is from the lecture that you now get to have for free. Next slide, get your pencils out. Okay, we've talked about evolution. Magnificent that this all comes together. How did we make it this far? Because we have a brain that is able to adaptively engage with a changing environment for the purpose of survival. That's it, man. There's evolution. Can you do that? You'll likely make it, okay? So this is a slide from a lecture that you can get for free. Now, I have to tell you something. I sell some of my lectures online, just trying to recoup some of the pain of the travel, okay? So this is not yet available free, but you see that Education for Life, Neuroscience Perspectives on Montessori Education. If you go to that webpage right now and click on that, you'll get to watch like 10 minutes, okay? But over the weekend, after I get home, I'll put the full 2-hour version right there. So if you click on that, you won't be limited to 10 minutes. You get to watch the whole thing, which, again, I think dovetails so beautifully with what we've talked about earlier today. And anyway, I'd like you to be able to see it if you want to. I mean, I'm not saying dig me. I'm saying, there may be some relevant content for you there. Okay, so it can't be about the test. In fact, the test is a bad metric. What else do we want to say here? Okay, so we have to be able, but the thing is that everybody else thinks it is about the test, because they haven't fully understood yet the sort of bankruptcy of having it only be about the test. They don't know that yet. So why Montessori, to them, is always going to be, for example, how well do the Montessori children do on the test? And if they don't do, orders of magnitude better, if they do just the same, or approximately the same, why the hassle? So what we have to do is we have to start making a case that is, that is powerful, okay? That's compelling to parents and policymakers, that's public, so that we can lead a discussion about what children really need to know. That's data-driven, because we're not making it up. Here's our evidence, and that is a strong case, okay? So we have to make this case for Montessori. What people want is they want to know what the test scores are. That's fine. All over the world, people are gradually figuring out that the test scores are not a predictor, okay? They're a predictor of future test scores. Now, but if we are in a situation, let's say, it's almost like a cycle, okay? Seriously, every country around the world at some point becomes infatuated with test scores. Where are we in Norway right now? Are you infatuated with test scores in Norway? Okay, that will change. Just as it is changing in the United States, just as it is beginning to change in the United Kingdom. I don't know where things stand in Australia right now, but it seems like it's about a 15 to 20-year arc. You understand what I mean? I mean, seriously, this is how it works. Some party or politician gets elected selling education reform based upon getting tough on those deadbeat teachers who must be smoking behind the school. They're certainly not doing their job, and we're gonna turn the screws a little bit tighter by measuring how well the children are doing. What is school for? School's for learning stuff. What are we gonna do? We're gonna give more testing to see if they're learning more. Okay, it's just dead simple. That's just how it works everywhere. And you have to do that long enough to screw things up before you think, what else can we do? And that will happen in Norway. Probably the conversation is beginning in certain places. What else should we be thinking about? So here's what we want to propose. We propose gathering evidence. Evidence in anticipation and to drive the conversation in Norway. Evidence of what? Evidence that, okay, fine, we can gather up some test scores. We can do that, which probably we ought to do anyway, just to begin the conversation. But there's evidence of how well the brains are constructed. Okay, we can get that kind of evidence, and it doesn't mean that you have to do MRIs or things like that. And so that's what I kind of want to talk about. I want to talk about the kind of evidence that we can accumulate, and then I'm going to talk about some evidence that exists, and then I'm going to invite you to join me during the lunch hour to volunteer to help chart a course forward in Norway. Okay? So let's talk about standards of evidence. First off, there's assertion, which probably you've done a lot of. Montessori is great. Trust me. That's a low standard. That's not evidence, okay? And then there's like an anecdote. Hey, Montessori worked great for this one child that I know. Worked great for my child. Okay, that's not a lot of evidence either. Now, what if we compiled a bunch of anecdotes? Like we surveyed all the graduates, all the parents of graduates from your school. And we started looking at themes that emerged, and 98% said, best thing ever, Well, that ends up having a little more weight than just an assertion or one person's story. In fact, what if we did that, or we started compiling? Yeah, this is it. This is where we could compile just the test scores that the children at our schools get, okay? Maybe even the scores they get in the year after they leave your school, if we can have a relationship with their families. That's a little bit higher standard because it's a little more objective. This is a really high standard. This is true experimental design to do a randomized controlled trial. So here's how it works. You have people come to your school and you say, we're really happy to have your interest. If you don't mind, we're going to flip a coin, and if it comes up heads, welcome to our school. If it comes up tails, we're going to send you to this other school. We hope you don't object. Obviously, you can't do that. But there are places where that is possible, like in the United States, where there's an awful lot of Montessori of varying quality in public schools. To say an awful lot, that's probably saying a lot. But there are hundreds of schools that are doing some version of Montessori. And when they have, it's a common method that they say, well, too many people are applying, So we're going to have a lottery, and if you win the lottery, congratulations, you get to go to the Montessori school. If you lose the lottery, you'll go to some other school, okay? Now that's randomized assignment, and that's true experimental design, and that's been done. That is a very high standard of evidence, and I'll talk about some studies that you should know about. If you don't already, you probably do. And then what's even better is a replication of a randomized controlled trial, so it wasn't just a one-off. And then better still is a hostile randomized controlled trial replication, where somebody says, I don't believe it, we're going to do it ourselves. We don't have that yet. We have now replication of randomized controlled trials. That is a very high standard of evidence in the United States that I think can be extended wider with some other things, okay, if we do some other things. So there's Lillard's 2006 classic study. You should have this in your pocket. You know these, God, for God's sake, I've been showing these charts for, I don't know, 5, 10 years. So if you've seen me talk, you've seen this. It's a wide range of outcomes that Lillard reports, and again, it's a randomized controlled trial. There's age 12. Not going to go into detail on this. If you don't have this, you should have it. We've got, and see, here's what happens. Somebody does a powerful study like that, and it hits the press. Scientific American is like a big, rather prestigious national science magazine, okay? So when you do a good study, it hits the press. This is a good place for that study to have been reported. Here's from 2012, Lillard demonstrated that it's not just Montessori, it matters how you do it. If you do Montessori well, you get better outcomes. In fact, here's the quote. Although they performed no better in the fall, children in classic Montessori programs as compared to children in supplemented Montessori and conventional programs showed significantly greater school year gains on outcome measures of executive functioning, reading, math, vocabulary, social problem solving, suggesting that high fidelity Montessori implementation is associated with better outcomes than lower fidelity or business as usual. That's important. That helps us take, which group are you aligned with? It helps us take that out of it because it matters how you do it. And now Lillard replicated her randomized controlled study with another city that had public Montessori, good public Montessori, and had the whole waiting list business, and we saw this. Now, I'm going to have to interpret this for you, and I don't want to run out of time, so I'm going to go a little fast. That is the normal range there, okay? And what we've got there is Montessori and conventional children. Some of them had more money than others, but none of them were rich. You understand what I mean? Sort of middle class versus children living in poverty. And what we find is that the children living in poverty, they improve almost to the green line. The green line is like mid-average, okay? So the green haze, the gray haze, that's the average range. The point is that what almost always happens is the children living in poor circumstances go lower and lower and lower, like their colleagues did in the conventional schooling. You all with me on this? Okay, except the Montessori children got better and better. Better and better. One more time, if they'd had a time 5, they would have crossed the midpoint. So that's a powerful kind of a finding, and that, not different at the first testing. They got better, they equalized. In fact, it's looking good for the children from disadvantaged backgrounds, not just for the wealthy or for the privileged. Montessori works well for everybody. And that hits the press too. In fact, a study finds that Montessori education obliterates the difference between high and low income kids. Wow, that's a nice quote, isn't it? Okay. Now, you're a little more homogeneous society than the United States, and maybe the most compelling question in Norway in education is not how can we help poor children do better academically. Maybe there are other kinds of questions. But this is a kind of evidence that is generating discussion and getting people who previously didn't know much about Montessori to start paying attention to Montessori. In fact, the Brady Education Foundation, which funded Lillard's work, has now funded a large-scale, mass, multiple randomized controlled trial replication again. So you could say that the randomized controlled trial, that bin is now almost full. We're going to have a number of sites where this has been done, which I'm sure will underscore what we already know, that Montessori is better for everybody, but it's especially better for poor children. Okay, so we also in the United States had a systematic outcome evaluation done in public Montessori programs in South Carolina. quite variable in quality, some of them pretty good, some of them not very good at all. But nevertheless, Brooke Colclazure's study shows that Montessori had a better outcome for almost everybody. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you because I'm going to run out of time. Wow, Education Week. That's an education journal in America. Does a Montessori model work in public schools? Ask South Carolina. They'll tell you. That's what happens when you do this stuff at some reasonable scale. Now, like when it's your school doing something interesting, it's not like this because you don't have the scale, you know what I mean? Do something interesting in your school, track some outcomes, but it starts making a real difference when 60% of Montessori schools in Norway start tracking some outcomes, okay? Scale matters, it's what gets press, and press is what helps lead the public conversation. Okay, yeah, South Carolina's public Montessori programs can bridge the achievement gap. That's a big issue in the United States. I can't speak to how big an issue that is in Norway. And here we got the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector, an entire nonprofit dedicated to improving Montessori in public education. We start compiling data like this, showing systematically, almost everywhere you go, if you do it pretty well, you get these kinds of differences. And this is just test scores, okay? This is just test scores because we got to talk to those people who think that's what matters. So, okay, let's give them the bloody test scores, which is, in effect is what they're doing now. So this can be done. When it's done at scale, it's persuasive. It causes buzz. It helps people decide that they need to learn more about this, not just because maybe they have a child that they want to send to a Montessori school, but because they start thinking maybe this is a better way for our whole society. Now, there are some issues. One is that lack of an objective definition of what good Montessori is. Now, what Lillard classified as classic Montessori, well, AMI Montessori, that's what she was able to. The point is that, as soon as we talk about organizations, it becomes kind of political. But the thing is, the testing was objective. So it's worth noticing that if you have a higher fidelity to Montessori's original vision, it's possible you'll have better outcomes. Okay, another consideration. It's difficult to do real, true experimental design. That randomized assignment thing is a problem for the vast majority of Montessori schools who can't, send their waiting list or whatever to somewhere else. That's not how it's going to work. It's not going to work that way in most places. What else we want to say? And to do a single site is not impactful. To do something at your school is good. We learn something from that. But it's not going to start changing the tide of education in Norway. And also, if you do so I'm going to talk about executive functioning, which if you've heard me speak before, maybe you've heard me talk about, so I'm not going to define it now. But for example, if I'm using one measure of executive functioning and you're using a different measure, and then somebody else is using like a questionnaire measure instead of a laboratory test, now we've kind of spun it in different ways, and no measure correlates that well with other measures. You understand what I mean? There's always little bits of variation, so it never works as well as you'd hope. So let's see, how about, well, by the way, if I asked you, how would you feel about doing a little outcome study at your school, you would say, I guess there's some things we could do. I know that they take tests at some point, maybe they do in your school or not. So it's not that hard, but if you haven't done it before, it's new. And if it's new, it's anxiety-provoking. And then finally, there's always this one. Are you serious? We're trying to run a school here, and while we're glad you're doing this, we do have limited time and resources, and that's a real consideration. So that's got to be easy. It's got to be affordable. It can't be too expensive in terms of time or resources. Okay, so still, it would be nice if we could, as a global movement, say, if you do Montessori at least this well, you consistently, reliably, predictably get these kind of results, regardless of the child's family background or social conditions. We could say that. We really can't yet, but we could. In fact, what would it be like to say, we have a large catalog of programs that do this, from all cultures all over the world, different languages, serving different populations. We see it across culture, language, region, and economic status. It is a predictable, reliable result that we see over and over and over. We could do this. Now, we don't have this right now, and what we really need to do is we need to start creating the systems that allow us at a regional, national, and ultimately international level to do this. It would also help us as a movement understand what are the differentiating features within a high-power Montessori, the stuff that really makes a bump. And what do we mean by good Montessori or not as good Montessori? So we're calling this the Montessori Global Outcomes Project, and it's going to take a few years. It's going to take a little while to develop the systems, and then it's going to take a while to accumulate the data. And it's not for everybody, but we've tried to arrange it so that anybody who wants to can get involved at least some level, an easy all the way through hard level. So our goals in the design was to make it universal. Anyone can get involved. Want it to be a value add, good for your organization. Maybe you learn something from it. We want to attract positive attention in our wider societies. It's kind of like data-driven advocacy, right? I don't know, we got these numbers. Policymaker, what would you do with these numbers? And we want to engage a wider research community. One of the things we try to do is make friends with established researchers in other disciplines that are not Montessorians because, geez, it's fun to see it's fun to listen to Carla, I'm sure, and see what Montessori's been doing. Our natural allies from a cognitive developmental standpoint seem to be people who are neuroscientists. Our natural allies don't seem to be necessarily people who are in the education field. Not to say that they're not, but they're not our natural allies, if you understand what I mean. Oh, what else? Did I want to say anything else about that? Okay, so we want to make it easy and cheap to get involved, and we want to make it, we want to give you different levels of participation. So this is what we want to provide for you. Kind of like a toolkit, the methodology, the training, the assessment tools, the data management, so you don't have to worry about losing a spreadsheet. Data analysis and interpretation, working with your regional or national organizations, and a global integration of results so we can make that powerful statement about the value of Montessori. So that means we have things like questionnaires for your graduates. Was Montessori good for you? How would you compare your Montessori experience to your conventional experience? We've got graduate parent survey. We've got a receiving teacher. Probably the most powerful is what do the teachers of your graduates say about them? Well, you know what they say about them. But we just haven't gathered that systematically, so we can say, 90% of receiving teachers say, please send more just like that one, although you've heard that. I know you have. We got the Montessori Teacher Style Questionnaire, which we think will capture some of what makes powerful Montessori versus less powerful Montessori. Certainly Montessori style, different ways of doing Montessori. That could end up being a strong predictor of outcome. We've got the Minnesota Executive Function Scale, and during the lunch break, if you want to play with that, it's an app that runs on an iPad. I can demonstrate that for you. We've got the Runco Creativity Assessment Battery, which only takes about 15 or 20 minutes per child to administer. I can show you some examples of that. We also have school improvement tools, one of them called the Developmental Environment Rating Scale, created by our friends at the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. And again, we want to be able to assist with data analysis and reporting, and then consultation regarding the messaging. Okay, so this is ambitious. Can I do all this tomorrow? We can't do this tomorrow. But we can figure out how to do this together. I mean, look, this isn't that hard, This is about creating procedures. It's about people in Norway saying, this sounds interesting. How do I get involved? This is how you get involved. It's not for everybody, I understand that. Maybe this isn't your thing, but I know for some of you, this lights you up a little bit. And so you're the ones that I want to talk to during the lunch break. Okay, so we're over time now. So I'm just going to, for example, I can show you the Minnesota Executive Function Scale. It's a little rule learning test, okay? Really interesting, sort of like doing it. Easy to learn how to administer it. Takes about 4 minutes per child. 4 minutes per child. How many children do you have in your school? Got to be trained in how to administer it. There's some money. None of this is free. $5 per child per year, something like that. You can find that. What else do we want to say? Yeah, so here's, I'm now well past my time, so let me just, I'll just as an example, okay? So, this is how high income and low income, again, that's the big deal in the United States. Maybe it's not so much in Norway. I don't know, you'll have to tell me. But the point is that we can show on the MEFs, high income, low income, typical performance. Oh, that's the Marie Montessori Institute, very high-end population. There's Cornerstone in St. Paul, which serves a very poor population. There's South Carolina, mixed income, Memphis, mixed income, public, mixed income, public. So suddenly it starts getting interesting, doesn't it? Yeah, because when you aggregate it together like this, people start looking for relationships, and then you start thinking, wow, Cornerstone, believe me, that's like almost 50% of those children have been classified by the public school system as having an emotional or behavioral disturbance. It's not easy, but there's commitment and they do it well. So hey, we can do this too, We could do this too. What else? Yeah, there's the DERS. Yeah, these are because I've told stories, I've gone long, so I'm just going to have you look at that, okay? Look at that, quick, okay? These are the things that DERS tries to assess. It's an app. It's an app that you sit there doing an observation for an hour, and you tap on these different criteria. There's child, adult, and environment criteria, and you rate what you see around you, both in the adult's interaction with the children's interaction with each other, features in the environment. Really powerful. Not a specific Montessori measure, but strongly reflects good Montessori practice. And it's a great tool for general school improvement, you know what I mean? Because it puts your consciousness into that. There's a version for primary and also for elementary. There's a criteria for joy. How much joy do I see in the environment? Okay, now I'm really late. You guys are probably hungry. So you get the idea, right? I can demonstrate this app for you over lunch as well. I'm not trying to sell it, but you have to buy it, right? You have to pay for this. You're not going to pay me for it. You're going to pay National Center for Montessori in the public sector, but incredibly useful tool. Oh, God, that even looks kind of sexy. There you go. There's some real data for you there, right? Okay, so we got the teacher style inventory being developed by our friends doing research with the American Montessori Society. Okay, this is not an AMI tool. That's being developed by a research coordinator for AMS and somebody who's an AMS trainer, and covering these areas, okay? Structure, curriculum, amount of freedom. Again, time is limited, but that's going to be available. It's in late stage development, and I think it has promise. What else? The Run Code Creative Assessment Battery. Yeah, this stuff isn't that hard. You can ask them to, as an example, just example items, list alternative titles for the movie Titanic, list alternative titles for the play Romeo and Juliet. It's production. How many alternatives can they come up with? It's divergent thinking skills, and there's more divergent thinking around practical issues in daily life. And these, oh my God, these things already exist in Norwegian because Norwegian researchers have been using them. So boom, there it is. Okay, what else we want to say? This is if you did everything, this is maybe how it would look for your school. So you do these questionnaires in the fall, you do a DERS to kind of rate the environment in the fall, you do the MEFs to kind of read executive functioning, you do the creative assessment battery in the fall. Maybe you do another DERS to track how your school is doing in the winter, and then in the spring you repeat some of these. And you do that, let's say, for 3 years in a row. It's not nothing. And probably not everybody's up for this because running with these apps and doing the training and suddenly it's something else that you have to do. But you could just do some questionnaires. It'd be helpful for us in Norway, for example, to know what is the sort of dominant Montessori teaching style. What do our alumni parents say about their children's experience in Montessori? You get the idea. So level 2, okay, a little harder. Get involved in doing something that's not as convenient, but maybe has a payoff for you. Now you can brag about this with your community. And finally, level 3, maybe even bring in the academic performance. So what would it be like if we started getting sites all over the world, and then we could compare across language, we could compare across culture, and quietly compare across how well the Montessori is being implemented. That matters too. It helps us as a community improve our game. Okay, so spring or fall in 2019, Nina and I will organize a training. Hopefully we'll begin a conversation well before then. You'll learn how to, learn what it's going to look like. It will cost you some money, but I think you can afford this. It's not nothing. There's a time and there's a material investment, but the idea is not, to exploit, just to make it possible. And with that, okay, I guess I better say, what would it be like to be able to make this assertion, to be able to make this assertion globally? Maybe that brings us closer to what we all know we need. So with that, I'm going to say, I think she would like us to do this, and I want to say thank you. And sorry to go long.